He was a man of precision, a scholar of brushstrokes and pigments, a guardian of beauty during one of the darkest eras in human history. Dr. Emil Hartmann walked the marble corridors of Berlin's museum district with the quiet confidence of someone who believed art could outlive nations. He was respected, admired even by colleagues who saw him as the last true curator of his generation, a man who could identify a Renaissance master from a single corner of canvas. But beneath his polished exterior lay something else, something no one saw coming. In early 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin and the city convulsed in fear, Dr. Hartmann did something no one expected. He vanished. No farewell letters, no documented exit papers, no witness statements. He was there one day, giving instructions to preserve archival materials in case of a bombing, and gone the next, like a shadow swallowed by the smoke-filled streets. The Reich bureaucracy left behind stacks of inconsistent reports. Some said he collapsed during a bombing raid. Others whispered he fled with fleeing officials. None were verified. But there was one rumor, just one, that survived in hushed conversations among archivists and old museum guards. Hartmann didn't flee alone. He left with something priceless. Priceless meant different things depending on who said it. To some, it meant he'd taken rare manuscripts. To others, stolen paintings. A few even whispered he'd taken a single masterpiece, one tied to a wealthy Jewish family who had vanished long before the bombs fell. But without evidence, without documents, without a trace, the rumor persisted like a ghost. And decades later, historians would return to this rumor, turning it over like a jagged artifact, wondering, what had Hartmann carried into the night, and why had he risked everything to take it? The museum staff who last saw him recalled eerie details: his uncharacteristic silence, the frantic glances over his shoulder, the crates sealed with thick rope. One assistant swore Hartmann muttered, "This must not fall into their hands." Whose hands, he never clarified. As Berlin burned and the world unraveled, Dr. Emil Hartmann stepped out of history and into myth. A curator turned fugitive, swallowed by the chaos of war, and carrying secrets that would not surface for 77 years. It was a bitter February night in 1945 when the last confirmed sighting of Dr. Emil Hartmann unfolded not in Berlin, but at a dimly lit train depot somewhere between the capital and the collapsing front lines. Witness accounts later gathered like fragments of a broken mirror, each piece offering a sliver of truth but never the full reflection. A station worker remembered a pale-faced man in a long wool coat struggling to load several heavy crates onto the rear cargo car of a night train. The crates were thick, reinforced with steel corners, and stamped with the cryptic phrase, "Fragile cultural assets." Another witness, a fleeing civilian, recalled seeing Hartmann's gloved hands trembling as he signed a faded manifest sheet with a fountain pen, muttering that the journey had to be completed before sunrise. But sunrise never came for that train. It wasn't a passenger route, at least not in the conventional sense, but a last-resort freight line used by officials trying to move valuables out of the city before the advancing Allied forces closed the corridor for good. Moments before departure, air raid sirens wailed, echoing across the station. People scattered, lights flickered. Then came the explosions, shells pounding the tracks somewhere in the distance, closer with every second. Yet the train lurched forward into the darkness, smoke trailing behind it like a wounded animal limping toward safety. That train was never seen again. Bombing records from that night are inconsistent. Some maps suggest the route was destroyed near a forested ravine. Others indicate the train may have been redirected to a hidden bunker line, an experimental system meant to move high-value cargo underground. None of these theories were ever confirmed. What is known is chillingly simple. Hartmann boarded that train with multiple crates, and none of them ever reached their listed destination. When investigators combed surviving depots in the months after the war, they found no sign of the cargo cars, no wreckage, and no registration logs showing arrival. It was as if the train dissolved into the night, and Hartmann with it. From that moment, he became a ghost. His name mentioned only in classified memos and whispered conversations among art historians, who suspected he had taken something irreplaceable. Something worth fleeing into chaos for, something worth disappearing forever. For more than half a century, the legend of Dr. Emil Hartmann simmered quietly beneath the surface of academic circles, a ghost whispered about in dusty archives and footnotes. But in the early 2000s, a discovery jolted the myth back to life. Deep inside a government storage facility in Potsdam, researchers cataloging forgotten wartime records stumbled upon a weather-stained folder stamped with a fading eagle insignia. Inside lay fragments, just fragments of documents that would rewrite everything historians thought they knew about Hartmann. The folder bore a chilling title, Kunstschutzakte H47, Art Protection File H47. Pages inside were brittle and incomplete, eaten away by moisture and time. Yet, even damaged, the content was explosive. Hartmann's signature appeared on requisition forms, transport logs, and sealed memos tied to the Reich's so-called Art Protection Unit, a department allegedly created to safeguard cultural heritage during the war. But anyone who knew the truth understood those words were nothing but a mask. Beneath the title lay the machinery of organized theft on an industrial scale. These were the records of looting. One document listed Hartmann as having supervisory privileges over confiscated collections from Jewish families across Poland, France, and the Netherlands. Another referred to a catalog containing over 6,000 items, paintings, manuscripts, ceremonial silver, rare books, each stripped from its rightful owners as families were deported, displaced, or erased. Among the pages was a list of crate numbers, many now missing from museum inventories. A chilling annotation beside one entry read, "Secured for private safekeeping, location undisclosed," handwritten in Hartmann's precise script. Historians who examined the file couldn't agree on his role. Was he a reluctant archivist forced to participate? Or a willing profiteer hiding treasures as the Reich collapsed? The documents offered glimpses but not clarity. Still, one truth was undeniable. Hartmann had access to unimaginable wealth, artistic, cultural, and historical, and he moved something unaccounted for. The discovery ignited a storm. Museums reopened cold files, families resurfaced claims from generations past, archivists traced crate numbers into dead ends. But one archivist, a young historian named Lena Weber, noticed something others overlooked. A repeated symbol in the margins of Hartmann's notes, a small triangular mark beside certain items. A code? A destination? Or a warning? Whatever it was, the Hartmann files proved one thing. His disappearance wasn't random, it was deliberate, and he had left behind a trail buried under decades of silence, waiting to be followed. If the Hartmann files reopened the mystery, the truth hiding in the Hartmann family attic poured gasoline on it. For years, his descendants spoke only reluctantly about their grandfather. Emil Hartmann was a ghostly figure in family lore, a brilliant man, yes, but increasingly unstable in his final years. He died in the late 1960s, tormented by nightmares, muttering warnings that made no sense to the children who overheard them. "What is hidden should remain hidden," he whispered to his grandson during one of his final lucid moments. "What we buried must never be unearthed." The family chalked it up to dementia, to the unraveling of a mind burdened by old age and wartime memories. They tucked away his belongings, journals, sketches, letters, into a wooden chest and forgot about them. But decades later, when the Hartmann files emerged, historian Lena Weber contacted the family. They agreed to let her examine the old chest, expecting little more than dusty pages and nostalgic scribbles. Instead, they found something unsettling. Hartmann's journals weren't rambling records of fading memory, they were meticulous. Pages filled with coded symbols, cross-referenced lists, and strange geometric sketches. Dates matched the timeline of the missing crates. Item names matched the looted catalog. And in the margins, scribbled in pencil so faint it was barely visible, were numbers. Not dates, not item counts, coordinates. At first, the family assumed they were simple notes, travel reminders, or archival references, But Lena recognized them instantly. They mapped to a section of the Harz Mountains, an area known during the war for hidden bunker systems and subterranean storage facilities. An area untouched for decades. The family's dismissive laughter faded quickly. Memories resurfaced, stories of Hartman waking in the night, trembling, insisting the mountain keeps what man cannot. Another page contained a chilling line. If they find it, the past will rise again. No one knew what he meant, but the coordinates, 3 sets of them, aligned perfectly with an abandoned wartime complex sealed after 1945. Lena felt a cold ripple run through her as she traced her finger across the faded ink. Hartman hadn't simply fled from Berlin. He had hidden something, protected something, buried something beneath stone and earth. And now, after 77 years, the map in his own hand was finally pointing toward the truth he had spent a lifetime trying to conceal. The Harz Mountains had always carried a certain silence, the kind that felt intentional, as if the forest itself guarded old secrets. But on a cold morning in late autumn, when Lena Weber and a team of explorers followed Hartman's faint pencil coordinates into the dense undergrowth, that silence thickened. The coordinates led to a slope blanketed in moss, thorns, and twisted roots, a place where sunlight struggled to break through the canopy. At first, nothing stood out, just forest, rocks, and the skeletal remains of rusted fencing half swallowed by earth. Then one explorer's boot struck something solid. The metallic clang echoed unnaturally through the trees. They cleared branches and decayed foliage, and a slab of reinforced concrete emerged, angled, cracked, its edges blackened by blasts that had scarred it decades earlier. It wasn't just a slab. It was a sealed bunker entrance. The structure was massive, partly collapsed on one side, with jagged rebar jutting out like skeletal fingers. Thick vines had coiled around handles and hinges, locking the past beneath living roots. The air around it carried the faint, metallic smell of old machinery and damp stone. A second clang sounded when they struck deeper, revealing the bunker's door steel, dented, frozen shut by rust. An insignia faintly appeared under grime, a triangle with intersecting lines. The same symbol from Hartman's journals. The explorers felt the weight of the moment settle on them. This wasn't a myth. This bunker existed, and whatever lay within had been untouched for nearly 8 decades. They used ground-penetrating scanners. Readings showed hollow chambers extending deep beneath the hillside. But there was something else, something unnatural, a distinct repetition of metal surfaces clustered tightly in an area that should have been rock and soil. Crates, machinery, or something far more valuable. When one explorer ran a hammer along the collapsed wall, the echo was deep, resonant, like a cavern filled with metal or treasure. But the most unsettling discovery came at dusk, when the forest grew still and shadows lengthened. A gust of wind blew away leaves near the structure, revealing faint markings etched into the concrete beside the sealed door. Not nature, not erosion. Words, faint but readable. Hartman's handwriting style. 3 chilling words. Es ruht hier, it rests here. And beneath that, a scratch mark shaped like a downward arrow. Lena's breath caught. The bunker wasn't simply forgotten, it had been hidden and sealed as if something inside was never meant to see the light again. By the following week, the site swarmed with activity. A specialized archaeological recovery team arrived, equipped with tools suited for excavation and caution. This was no ordinary dig. This was a sealed wartime structure tied to looted treasures, potentially booby-trapped, and protected by the ghosts of history. Under the supervision of structural engineers, they cut through the rusted door with industrial saws, sparks showering the ground like fireflies. When the hinges finally groaned open, a deep rush of stale air burst forth, cold, musty, untouched since 1945. The entrance revealed a narrow corridor of reinforced concrete stretching into darkness. The walls were lined with rusted pipes, cables, and torn insulation. The floor bore deep grooves as if something heavy had been dragged through. As they advanced, their flashlights illuminated more unsettling sights. Heavy steel doors hung crooked on broken hinges. Metal beams, warped by explosions, created sharp angles that cast eerie shadows. In one section, The team found tripwire remnants cut long ago, but still a remnant of the precautions taken by those who built or sealed this place. Whoever abandoned this bunker expected it to be found, or feared it would be. The labyrinth turned deeper and more complex the farther they went. Side chambers revealed rusting generators, crates filled with corroded tools, and gas masks fused to shelves by time. In another room, a set of rotted bunks suggested that people had stayed here, slept here, waiting for orders that never came. The oppressive silence filled every corner. Then, in the third corridor, just past a collapsed section of ceiling, a flashlight beam caught something carved into the wall, scratched deep into the concrete, as if made in desperate haste. The letters were jagged, frantic, and unmistakably deliberate. Verloren Seelen Lost Souls. The phrase froze the room. No one spoke. The carving wasn't in an official handwriting style. It was crude, uneven, written by someone terrified or resigned. A warning, or a confession. The deeper they pushed, the more the air thickened, dust swirling like breath from unseen mouths. Every step echoed unnaturally, as if the bunker amplified their presence, reminding them they were intruders. And far below, faint metallic reverberations still pulsed through the walls, like the heartbeat of something waiting to be discovered. The team pressed forward, not knowing that what lay ahead would change everything they thought they understood about Emil Hartmann, his disappearance, and the vault he left behind. The air grew colder the farther the team descended, as though the bunker itself resisted the intrusion. Dust drifted through the beams of their flashlights, swirling like the ghosts of the past awakened from sleep. At the end of a cracked corridor, partially crushed by fallen concrete and twisted steel, the team reached a collapsed room, its entrance warped, its ceiling buckled. The engineers worked carefully, clearing debris piece by piece, until a narrow passage opened just wide enough for a person to slip through. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and untouched since the final days of the war. The room had clearly been struck by an explosion. Chunks of ceiling lay scattered across the floor, beams angled like broken bones. But amid the destruction, something stood upright, something incongruous. A single crate. It was large, weathered but intact, its wood darkened by age but free from rot thanks to the bunker's controlled environment. The markings on its side, barely visible under layers of dust, matched entries from Hartmann's files, K47, C1. The first crate. The archaeologists exchanged looks before prying it open. The crate hissed slightly as its seal broke, releasing a faint, musty scent of aged wood and old paper. Inside, layers of protective linen and waxed paper were packed with obsessive care. When the first painting was revealed, even the most seasoned members of the team gasped. It was a portrait brilliant in color, its brushstrokes unblemished, as if time had been afraid to touch it. A painting believed destroyed in 1943 during a fire in Warsaw. There was no scorch mark, no tear, nothing but perfection. One by one, they lifted more artworks, each preserved with obsessive precision canvases, sketches, gilded frames wrapped meticulously. And then they saw it, stamped in the bottom corner of every canvas, barely visible until dust was wiped away, was a small emblem, a symbol resembling interlocked vines surrounding a stylized S. The insignia of the Salomon family, one of Europe's most respected Jewish collectors, deported in 1942, their estate seized, their entire collection declared missing. For decades it was assumed everything had been burned or sold off, but here it was hidden, protected, sealed beneath a mountain. Why had Hartmann saved these pieces? Was it guilt, defiance, or something far more calculated? As the team gently rewrapped each painting, one detail chilled them. The crate had space for more. Empty compartments. As if Hartmann had intended to bring additional pieces but never returned. Something interrupted him. Something forced him to abandon his mission before completing it. And somewhere deeper in the bunker, the truth waited buried behind walls Hartmann believed would never be breached. It was one of the engineers, not the historians, who first sensed something off about the collapsed room. After hours cataloging debris, he noticed that one wall on the far side of the chamber didn't match the others. Its texture was smoother, its color slightly different, as though it had been constructed later than the rest. When they ran a thermal scanner over it, the reading confirmed what Hartman had tried to hide. The temperature behind that wall was lower, hollow. There was something on the other side. They worked in silence, chiseling at the false wall until a seam appeared. Stone cracked under pressure, dust billowed outward. And then, with a final strike, the wall collapsed inward, revealing a hidden chamber untouched by time. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a vast room larger than any space they had explored so far. And inside, arranged with almost ritualistic precision, were 15 crates. Each stacked carefully, corners aligned, lids perfectly sealed, not scattered, not hastily hidden, displayed, as if waiting for someone who would never return. The crates bore hand-labeled tags, dates ranging from 1939 to 1945, and initials corresponding to families, estates, and private collections scattered across occupied Europe. Hartman had cataloged them himself. Each crate wasn't just a box, it was a capsule of a stolen life. Inside one, they later found gold ceremonial objects. Inside another, letters written in elegant handwriting, their ink faded but readable pleas, hopes, fragments of lives that should have been preserved by history, not sealed underground. In the third crate they opened, an ivory Torah pointer lay wrapped in velvet, untouched. In the fourth, children's drawings, crayon sketches of homes, pets, and smiling families preserved with the same reverence as the priceless masterpieces. The deeper the archaeologists explored the vault, the more the air grew heavy. Hartman hadn't been a thief storing loot. He had been a curator assembling something akin to a memorial, and yet his motivations remained impossible to decode. Was he saving these items from destruction, or hoarding them for personal gain? The crates offered no answers, only artifacts, each one carved from tragedy. But one detail unsettled everyone. According to Hartman's own wartime inventory, he transported 22 crates. Only 15 were here. 7 were missing. Were they hidden elsewhere in the bunker? Removed, destroyed, or buried in another undiscovered vault? As the team stood among the stacked crates, one truth settled over them like dust. This wasn't the end of Hartman's story. It was only the point where his secrets began to bleed into daylight. The cataloging process began with a reverence that bordered on ritual. Archivists donned gloves, breathed shallowly, and approached each crate as if opening a coffin. Every lid lifted felt like resurrecting a fragment of a life extinguished, a story severed mid-sentence by the machinery of war. Crate after crate revealed artifacts that didn't simply belong to history, they were pieces of people. The Renaissance portraits were the first to emerge. Regal women in satin gowns, merchant families posed in front of lavish estates, children with hopeful faces that would never age. Their eyes, painted centuries earlier, seemed to stare back at the researchers with an accusation that transcended time. Beneath the paintings came gold ceremonial items, menorahs, kiddush cups, wedding rings, and candlestick holders engraved with Hebrew inscriptions. Each item was wrapped in velvet, placed with such care it was clear Hartman had handled them like sacred objects. A Torah scroll unfurled next, its parchment surprisingly well preserved. The script glimmered beneath the flashlight beams, its edges lined with delicate silverwork. Someone had taken the time to wrap it layer after layer, protecting it from fire, moisture, and unthinkable hatred. Then came letters, hundreds of them, handwritten pages tied with faded ribbons, overflowing with love, fear, and uncertainty. They were addressed to family members across Europe, messages never delivered, words never read by their intended recipients. Some bore last signatures from people deported days later. Some ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the writer had been torn away before finishing. Jewelry followed, lockets containing miniature portraits, brooches shaped like flowers, bracelets inscribed with names and dates, tiny treasures that once held joy, now heavy with memory. In the final crate open that day lay family heirlooms, a child's carved wooden toy horse, a pocket watch engraved on its back with the phrase Zur Erinnerung in remembrance, a mother's silver comb, a father's ledger recording debts and savings, a set of porcelain teacups painted with delicate roses, cracked but intact. Every artifact carried weight not of monetary value, but of loss. These weren't just collectibles. They were voices, echoes, pieces of entire worlds erased. As cataloging continued, the bunker's silence deepened into something unspoken. Hartman hadn't simply stored art, he had stored grief, preserved tragedy, locked away memories in crates as if trying to freeze time before it shattered completely. And yet, deeper answers still lay hidden, waiting in the leather-bound journal found behind the last crate. The journal was discovered wedged behind the 15th crate, wrapped in oilcloth and bound with a leather strap cracked by age. Its cover bore no title, only the initials E.H., pressed faintly into the leather, as if even that small mark had been made with hesitation. When the archaeologists opened it, the bunker seemed to exhale. The pages, yellowed and brittle, contained Hartman's handwriting, neat, meticulous, the script of a man trained to catalog and preserve. But what lay within wasn't an inventory, it was a confession. In the earliest entries, Hartman described his idealistic beginnings. He had joined the Reich's art protection unit, the Kunstschutz, believing he would shield Europe's masterpieces from destruction. He wrote about his reverence for art, for culture, for history. "What is created in centuries," one entry read, "can be destroyed in minutes by madness." But the optimism evaporated with each page turned. By 1942, his elegant handwriting grew jagged, his words darker. He described corridors filled with seized paintings ripped from Jewish homes. He wrote of museum vaults overflowing with confiscated treasures labeled as state property. And then came the burning. "I watched them throw Caravaggios into the flames," Hartman wrote, ink smeared by what looked like a water stain or a tear. They destroyed history because they could not own it. Hartman chronicled the moment his role shifted from curator to witness, from protector to accomplice, his horror as he realized he was part of a machine devouring culture with the same brutality it unleashed on human lives. "I tried to save what I could," another line read. "Not for them, for the world." But doubt poisoned his words. Even in confession, he questioned his own motives. Was he rescuing these artifacts from destruction, or hoarding them for a future only he would control? "If I am condemned," Hartman wrote, "let it be by those who understand the weight of what I have carried." Page after page documented his growing paranoia. He feared the artifacts would be seized, sold, or burned. He feared the chaos would swallow everything. And finally, in an entry scrawled days before the war's end, he wrote a single sentence: "I must hide them before the world burns again." The journal ended abruptly after that, no signature, no goodbye. Only a broken man trying to save history while losing himself to the darkness of the era. But the journal didn't answer the final question. If Hartman hid these 15 crates, where were the missing 7? The journal sparked immediate controversy. Within days of its discovery, historians, curators, and investigators formed a table of argument that stretched from Berlin to New York. Everyone read the same words, yet no two experts agreed on their meaning. Was Hartman a covert savior who defied a brutal regime to rescue thousands of treasures? Or was he a thief who cloaked greed in a veneer of righteousness, taking advantage of chaos to build a secret collection meant for his own power? The contradictions within his journal became fuel for both sides. Early entries were filled with passion about art's sanctity, his reverence for culture, his horror at destruction. But in other pages, Hartman described opportunities, riches beyond imagination, influence he could wield if he controlled the fate of priceless masterpieces. "He who preserves beauty," one unsettling line read, "preserves power." The ink was darker there, the handwriting frantic. And then, weeks later, in a calmer script, another line: "I have sinned against the families. I know it. but I cannot let their legacy perish with them. How could one man hold such opposing truths? How could a curator claim devotion to art, yet speak of its value in terms of leverage? Some scholars argued that Hartman saw himself as a guardian, someone who took artifacts because he feared they would be destroyed. He was trying to save culture, one expert declared. He acted when others turned their backs. But critics pointed out that Hartman cataloged items with disturbing precision: dates, family initials, estimated value. He never contacted surviving relatives, never reported their locations, never made any attempt to return even a single piece. Instead, he sealed them underground, locked them away where no one could find them. "A savior doesn't bury what he protects," another historian countered, her voice cold. Others pointed to the missing 7 crates. Were they sold, hidden elsewhere, lost, or taken for personal use? The journal offered no answers, only fragmented thoughts swirling between guilt and ambition. Some passages read like prayers, others like blueprints for future wealth. Perhaps the greatest truth was this: Hartman lived in a time where morality drowned beneath fear. He was both witness and participant. He saved and he stole. He preserved and he betrayed. The debate raged with no resolution, because no scholar could crawl into the mind of a man caught between conscience and survival. Hartman's legacy remained a riddle, one that echoed through the bunker's walls like a question that refused to die. Did he save them or steal them? News of the discovery broke like a storm. Within hours, headlines flashed across Europe. Bunker of lost art found. Looted treasures unearthed after 77 years. Hartman vault stuns historians. Satellite trucks rolled into the Harz Mountains. Their antennas pointed skyward. Reporters swarmed the excavation site. Historians, museum directors, and legal teams arrived in convoys, each desperate to be part of what was quickly hailed as the greatest art recovery operation in post-war history. The German government acted swiftly. A task force was assembled, experts in provenance research, Jewish cultural representatives, archivists, and legal authorities. Their mission was monumental: identify the rightful owners or their descendants, authenticate every artifact, handle diplomatic claims, and build a chain of custody that could withstand litigation. The crates were transported under escort to a secure facility in Berlin, guarded as heavily as state secrets. Inside sterile, climate-controlled chambers, specialists began carefully unwrapping each piece, documenting it with forensic precision: digital scans, high-resolution photography, DNA testing on organic materials. Every artifact was cataloged, cross-referenced with wartime records, survivor testimonies, and international archives. Jewish heritage foundations joined the effort, providing names, genealogies, and missing person reports. Families long believed erased from history suddenly resurfaced in dusty records and faded photographs. Some descendants traveled across oceans to view items that once belonged to their grandparents' heirlooms they had only heard about in whispers. The media frenzy intensified. Documentaries were commissioned. News anchors broadcast live updates from outside the facility. Talk shows debated Hartman's motives. Newspapers published emotional interviews with descendants who held recovered letters in trembling hands. One woman collapsed in tears upon seeing her great-grandmother's menorah, an artifact her family thought had burned in 1941. In Parliament, debates erupted over restitution and international jurisdiction. Museums faced scrutiny for pieces in their possession that might link to Hartman's missing crates. Every new discovery twisted the story further: fragments of journals, shipping manifests, sealed envelopes containing photographs. The vault became both a miracle and a wound, an incredible trove of preserved heritage and a haunting reminder of the cruelty that made its existence necessary. Yet even as the recovery effort unfolded with unprecedented cooperation, a shadow lingered. The world celebrated the discovery of the 15 crates, but every official in the operation whispered the same fear behind closed doors. Where are the missing 7? The wave of discovery that began in the Harz Mountains didn't stop at the bunker door. It surged outward across Europe, sending shockwaves through communities that had carried generations of grief. Notices were sent. phone calls made, emails drafted with trembling hands, and soon the unthinkable happened. Families long resigned to loss began receiving news they never imagined they would hear. In Vienna, an elderly man named Samuel Rosenfeld was escorted into a climate-controlled viewing room. On the table before him lay a velvet-lined tray holding a necklace delicate gold, adorned with a tiny sapphire pendant. His knees buckled. "My grandmother wore this to her wedding," he whispered, voice cracking. He had only ever seen it in photographs, held in his mother's trembling hands before the war swallowed their world. Under museum lights, the pendant caught a glow that made it feel alive again. In Paris, the family of the Salomon collectors gathered in stunned silence around a recently restored oil portrait of their great-uncle, a stern man in a dark suit, painted by a master artist they believed lost forever. Tears flowed as they recognized the familiar tilt of his chin, the hint of a smile hidden in the brushstrokes. "We thought everything was gone," one descendant said, her hand pressed to her heart. "But he's still here. His story didn't disappear." In Amsterdam, a Torah scroll was returned to the surviving members of a family whose synagogue had been destroyed during the war. When they unrolled it, chanting softly, generations stood connected past to present, sorrow to hope. And in Berlin, a mother and daughter clutched a small carved wooden toy horse, its paint faded but intact. "My father made this for me before they took him," the mother said softly. She held it close, as if embracing her father himself. Emotional reunions unfolded across cities and villages, binding families to their heritage, restoring fragments of identity that had been severed by brutality. Museums documented each moment, not as spectacle, but as healing. For every item returned, history stitched itself back together, thread by thread. But even amid the joy, whispers remained questions that weighed heavily on every historian involved. If 15 crates brought this much restoration, what stories still lay buried in the missing 7? As the celebrations of recovered artifacts echoed across Europe, the academic and investigative communities entered a new phase 1, dominated by unease rather than triumph. The Hartman files listed 22 crates, 22 meticulously catalogued containers transported under Hartman's supervision, but only 15 had been found in the hidden vault. 7 crates, whole collections of stolen heritage, remained unaccounted for. The question haunted everyone: where were they? The bunker maps offered no clues. Thermal scans revealed no second chamber. The coordinates in Hartman's journal led only to the vault already discovered. And yet, records were clear: 7 crates simply vanished. Some experts theorized the missing crates had been stored elsewhere in the bunker complex, perhaps behind another sealed entrance lost under collapsed concrete. Others believed Hartman may have moved them before the war ended, sensing the collapse of the regime and the danger of leaving everything in one place. A handful of scholars took a darker view. Maybe those crates never survived. Maybe they had been destroyed in a fire, lost in a bombing raid, or looted again by desperate soldiers in the final days of the war. But these theories raised new questions. Why were the remaining crates hidden with such care while the others disappeared without a trace? The most unsettling hypothesis came from a forensic historian who studied Hartman's journal obsessively. She pointed to a cryptic entry dated April 1945. "The burden grows heavier. I must divide the legacy. All cannot rest in one grave." What did he mean? Did Hartman scatter the remaining crates across multiple locations, intentionally fragmenting the collection? If so, why? Fear? Paranoia? Strategy? Government officials ordered extensive searches across the Harz region, combing through old records, interviewing surviving eyewitnesses, and scouring nearby forests and abandoned structures. Nothing surfaced. Satellite imaging revealed no anomalies. Ground-penetrating radar found no additional voids. The missing crates seemed to have swallowed themselves into the earth. With each passing week, frustration grew. The media speculated wildly. Some insisted the crates were smuggled out after the war. Others hinted at black market dealings. A few conspiracy theorists even claimed Hartman had accomplices who continued his work after his disappearance. In the end, The mystery of the missing 7 crates became its own shadow, a reminder that Hartman's story was incomplete, that truth rarely arrives, neatly packaged, and that some secrets remain determined to stay buried. In the months that followed the bunker's discovery, the world struggled to decide how history should remember Dr. Emil Hartman. His name, once buried under decades of dust and obscurity, now appeared in newspapers, academic journals, and televised debates. Scholars dissected his motives. Survivors' families recounted their reclaimed heritage with gratitude and grief. Politicians argued over restitution laws. But beneath the noise, a quieter truth lingered. Hartman's legacy was a fractured mirror, neither purely heroic nor wholly monstrous, something in between, suspended in the gray where most real human stories live. Historians stood divided. Some hailed him as a flawed savior, a man trapped inside a corrupted system, trying to salvage what he could before everything burned. Others saw him as a calculating opportunist, gathering other people's treasures under the guise of preservation while planning his own escape. His journal captured both visions. His vault embodied both interpretations. It became impossible to label him simply, and maybe that was his final truth. What no one disputed was the undeniable impact of the vault itself. Museums across Europe dedicated exhibits to the recovered pieces, each artifact displayed with the names of the families it belonged to. Restored Torah scrolls were returned to synagogues for the first time in generations. Paintings once thought lost resumed their rightful place in family homes, hung with reverence beside photographs of ancestors who never came back. For many, Hartman's hidden trove was more than a collection of objects. It was a bridge between past and present, tragedy and remembrance. A reminder that even in the darkest times, memory can survive in unexpected ways. Yet the vault also cast a long shadow. The missing 7 crates became a symbol of unfinished history, a puzzle with pieces scattered beyond reach. Every recovered artifact raised the same haunting question: what stories still lay buried, unseen, unreturned? Search teams redoubled their efforts, expanding their scans beyond the bunker, into ravines, abandoned tunnels, and forests that had swallowed secrets for decades. New technologies were deployed. Old maps re-examined. Archivists combed through Hartman's writings line by line, hoping the answer lay hidden between his contradictions. But the earth remained silent, and so the search did not end. It transformed into a mission that would outlive its original discoverers. Hartman's legacy, flawed, fractured, and undeniably human, became a reminder that history is never complete, that every truth casts a shadow, and that somewhere in the mountains, 7 silent crates still wait for someone brave enough or desperate enough to follow the trail he left behind. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.